swallowed the red pill back in 2008 and began reporting the news in front of a camera in 2019. In that time, we've seen a complete upheaval in world politics. The battle lines have changed between the illusion of left versus right to the reality of globalism versus nationalism. Despite all the information, the truth and the lies, there are two very distinct pathways emerging. Should we follow Labor and Liberal to a dystopic one-world government, or do we fight for our nationalism, unlock our hidden resources wealth and build a new Australia? With the world teetering on a knife's edge, should we solidify our relationship with the USA and become the 51st state? This is my mission statement here on Australian National Review, and I welcome you to Black Pill me as hard as you can as we determine our future together. This is the 51st state. Hello and welcome to the 51st State. This is episode 16, and I am delighted to be able to let you know that our guest, Dr. John Eastman, who has, he's represented Donald Trump. He has worked for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. He will be here after the break to have a very frank discussion about a number of issues concerning us right from the very start about the Jeffrey Epstein decision by the Department of Justice. I understand that John Eastman also knows Kash Patel, and we'll be interested to see what he has to say about that, along with birthright citizenship. We'll also talk about lawfare and John's own case, who has been indicted for his defense of Donald Trump and the accusations that the 2020 election was stolen. So John is right at the middle of that, facing his own indictment. So it promises to be a very, very powerful interview. And I look forward to bringing you that after the break. You're watching the 51st State. Don't go anywhere. Straight after, John Eastman will be with me right here. And welcome back to the 51st State. Well, as promised, my guest for today's show is Dr. John Eastman. He's the founding director of the Claremont Institute's Centre for Constitutional Jurisprudence. He's also a former law professor at Chapman University's Fowler School of Law and served as a law clerk for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas in the 1990s. He's represented over a dozen parties before the US Supreme Court, and his life took a sharp turn when he helped President John Trump challenge the integrity of the 2020 election results. And he is facing disbarment, criminal charges in Georgia and Arizona, to which he's pled not guilty. And he joins me now for a very frank discussion about the legal system right now in the United States, where it's going, where it's headed, what went right, what went wrong. John Eastman, welcome to the 51st State.
Jason, thanks very much for having me on your program. I'm very much looking forward to our discussion.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto the show today. And look, this show is a little bit unique in that the 51st State is a concept that I introduced as a result of Australia being somewhat confused about our own identity and direction. When you have a globalist King Charles attending World Economic Forum meetings, and yet we're part of an AUKUS agreement, which is meant to defend against China, and yet China is our greatest trading partner, how could you be a servant to three masters? So it comes about the idea of exploring our legal entity, understanding as Australia as it is, and perhaps would we be better off if we were to pursue becoming the 51st State and maybe being protected by some of the things that we're missing here? We don't have a Bill of Rights. We don't have the right to bear arms, and we are really struggling with free speech. Now, if there's one person that can tell me all the reasons not to join the United States at the moment, it feels like, John, it would be you. But that is the concept. Let's go back a little bit. I mean, 2020 is what's really put you right out there. In a moment, I want to play a video clip, a preview to the film about you, the Eastman Dilemma. But if we were to go back to that period in history, would you have changed anything based on what you now know?
Well, no, I would have done exactly the same things. I think the evidence that we had before us at the time raised very serious questions about the legality of the 2020 election. And the evidence that has been marshaled ever since has just confirmed that. For example, to this day, there are more than 100,000 more ballots cast in Pennsylvania than there were voters. And the margin in Pennsylvania was 80,000. In Wisconsin, the margin was a little over 20,000. And we now know that there was an illegal operation in nursing homes that harvested ballots in violation of state law. Turnout rates went from 25% historic average to nearly 100%, including in memory care wings. And many of those ballots are written in the same handwriting. So we know the illegality opened the door for fraud. We know bad actors took advantage of that door and walked through it and engaged in fraud, more than sufficient to have affected the outcome of the election. Look, if you're looking to join the United States, you'll know that our founding document is the Declaration of Independence, the anniversary of which we just celebrated this past weekend, and looking forward to the big 250th anniversary celebration next year. It lays out the argument on why kings should not rule, but the consent of the governed, because all human beings are created equal. Well, none of us were around in 1776 or 1787 when the Declaration and the Constitution were signed. We give that consent by free and fair elections. And if they've stolen an election from us to pursue an agenda that we, the people, don't agree with, we're no longer self-governing people, but we've become subjects of a tyrannical government. And, like our founders pledged their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor to throw off a increasingly tyrannical government in the 18th century, I think it requires people to stand up now to what is increasingly tyrannical, oppressive, despotic actions by our government. And I would do it again, because I think we've inherited too much, something too precious, to let it be lost for our kids and grandkids.
This is the great dilemma, isn't it? The ability to want to stand up. Now, I don't know how many times I've said it on my platform coming out of Australia, but the United States is meant to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. And I know that you also have talked about that. What is your response to what the United States shouldn't become?
Well, when I teach a summer seminar for recent law school grads, and the one in 2023, we were in the middle of it, and everybody's phone started buzzing. And I looked down at mine. I was teaching a seminar on the religion clauses in our Constitution. And I looked down at the phone, and I get a text message that said, "You've just been indicted in Georgia." And everybody else's phones were buzzing. So I knew they all had the same message. But it was important for them to get the message about what our religion clauses meant. So I kept teaching. And at the end of the week, we always have a nice dinner and they roast each other. But they decided to roast me. They said, "Here he's teaching the religion clauses. And all of a sudden, rappelling down from the rooftops are a bunch of jackbooted thugs who come in and arrest him and haul him off." Now, of course, that didn't happen. But he said he continued to teach what his mission was. And that was a level of courage that we hadn't seen before. And then he closed with this. If you think about the national anthem, our national anthem, the last line, we always think about it was the flag still waving, but the question is not so much whether the flag still waves, but what kind of land it's waving over. Is it the land of the free and the home of the brave? Or has it become the land of the coward and the home of the slave? And boy, that was a stark awakening for what the stakes were that I was fighting for. And everybody in the room had tears in their eyes. Then we went back to drinking good wine, and we got over that pretty quickly. But
You're absolutely right. Land of the coward and home of the slave. This is the problem that we have here in Australia, and it all stems back, it seems, in the modern period to this COVID era, where all of a sudden bureaucracy and a defined deep state, if you will, that many of us have come to understand truly exists, was given the opportunity to do a trial close in sales terms to see exactly how much it could get away with and how much the people to whom it represents would go along with the system, this going along to get along, not rocking the boat. And here you are as a person who is professionally trained to be able to put into a position where you are meant to challenge illegality, wrongdoing. It's meant to be part of it, a test. You don't always win these cases, but you're meant to test them in a court of law. Jurisprudence, your specialty, is the philosophy of law, the understanding, I assume, of what this is all meant to be. And so that it's not meant to be black and white. It's meant to be argued. That's the point, right? So, and yet you circle back to a situation that we're meant to drop everything for a virus that we still don't know its origins. We still don't know if the cure was worse than the cause. And it was used to take away our rights in a way that we're just meant to just cop it on the chin. And that is absolutely the antithesis of the land of the free, of the home of the brave. Watching from the outside, John, I couldn't believe that Americans could be, sadly, as weak as they were. So Americans, do you think, have changed during this period as much as the rest of us around the world?
No, I think one of the reasons why President Trump won so handily in 2024 is the Americans woke up to what was going on. They saw it happen in 2020. They couldn't believe it. And then they got engaged in a very vigorous way. People say, well, how come Trump could win in 2024 if they stole it in 2020? Why didn't they steal it again? I say, well, because you had millions of pairs of eyes watching every step of the way. People were paying attention. We'd grown lackadaisical in this. But it goes back a lot further. A couple of my colleagues at the Claremont Institute have spent their scholarly careers studying the advent of the progressive era, we call it here in the United States, back to Woodrow Wilson, that it was a deliberate attempt to usurp the authority of the Constitution. They thought it had become outmoded, that it was no longer, we no longer had a government that operated as was necessary for the modern world. Things had just grown too complex for the ordinary people to understand and make decisions. And so they deliberately brought in the experts. The experts were going to go into all these alphabet soup agencies without any political accountability, and they were going to manage things better than we could ourselves. They were going to tell us if we could have a chair at our home office or needed a bench. They could tell us all these things. And what we saw with the COVID expertise was that it failed spectacularly. Because, it turns out ordinary human beings, whether they have a PhD after their name or not, don't have a lock on what's true. And the way we get to truth is we challenge it, we contest it. It's not Soviet style science where somebody says X and you're all supposed to say, oh, X must be true because the expert said it. No, X doesn't seem to make any sense. Putting masks on 2-year-olds doesn't seem to make any sense, and we should push back against that. I'll give you an example from my California bar trial, which was, I think, the longest, and most expensive bar disciplinary proceeding in history, and it's still ongoing. There was at one point there when I was accused of moral turpitude and lying because I said that there was illegality in the conduct of the election, and certain government officials had said there was not. And I said, I think they were wrong. And I had evidence that demonstrated they were wrong. I said, well, you kept pressing that even after they said everything was fine. And I said that, that's not the way it works. Or another example of it, we had an expert identifying problems down in Georgia. And, the state of Georgia put in their own expert that said our expert didn't know what he was talking about. And then I talked to our expert and I reread his opinion, and he had already addressed every criticism that they leveled at him. And I said, okay, well, we're going to keep going here. Why didn't you drop the case after they put in an expert that had a counter view? I said, well, that's not the way the adversarial system works. We go to a judge, we go to a jury and let those things be played out. There's not a single case that I know of where somebody doesn't put out a counter expert when you've got an expert. And if we're just supposed to, oh, okay, well, they've got an expert that says my guy's wrong. Forget about it. Let's drop the case. What utter nonsense. It's Orwellian. George Orwell wrote his famous book, 1984, 76 years ago now. He was absolutely correct. 40 years off. He predicted 1984. It hits in 2024. But it was the government will tell you what the truth is, and you're not allowed to challenge it. And if you dare to challenge it, they'll send somebody out from the aptly named Ministry of Truth to beat it out of you until you repeat the lie that 2 + 2 is 5. Not just repeat the lie, but come to believe the lie. And that's tyranny. That's despotism. And it's not freedom. And that's not what our country is. By the way, we'd welcome you. I wouldn't say 51st state, though. We'll trade California for Australia. And a definite improvement.
Well, that would be something for the history books, wouldn't it? Incredible. Isn't it ironic that California, for those of us that grew up in that era, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and it was the heyday of the golden age of this incredible state, but seemingly so many people tell us that it's unrecognizable from what we knew as we grew up. It's just something else.
In the 1960s, I remember we lived all over the country when I was growing up, and I remember California had not just the best education system in the United States, it arguably had the best education system in the world. And K through 12, higher education university system that was the envy of the world, that he eclipsed many of the major universities in the world that had, long predated them. And it's all gone. It's all gone. It's a war zone in the public schools now. They indoctrinate kids. That kids come out without able to read or write. You walk down the streets of once idyllic boulevards, and they're homeless people, and they've got a map to put, telling you where to avoid the worst of the human fecal deposits. Poop map, they call it. Drug needles everywhere. They took the most enviable climate and the most successful. It was one of the largest economies in the world as well, just that state alone, and they've utterly destroyed it and turned it into a third world country. But behind gated communities are still some of the wealthiest people in the country, and it is a disparity between wealth and abject poverty that cannot be sustained in the long term.
This is the feeling that we see all around the West, as if it is orchestrated or deliberate. John, what I'd like to do now is, for the benefit of our viewers watching in, is to show them the preview from the film about you, the Eastman Dilemma. We'll come back and continue our discussion about obviously 2020, but then I want to advance the conversation to talk about the reality of justice being served and the feeling that it hasn't been, and we've got to talk about the Epstein memo that was released. It's got a lot of people scratching their heads and wondering, and I know that you know Kash Patel, so we'll be able to sort of dig into that a little bit more and advance the conversation here, because at the end of the day, if justice is not served, we are living in a world that is not based on truth and reality, and it feels like that it's slipping away fast, and we need to be able to either correct it or work out how we're going to change this system once and for all. Let's play that.
To see how things are
If
tightening.
Joe Biden's at 253, if he holds on to Arizona and he gets Nevada, that's 270.
Joe Biden now leads in Pennsylvania statewide by 5,000.
The president is not going to be able to take over
by a very heavy margin.
The Fox News Decision Desk is calling Arizona for Joe Biden.
We can now project the winner of the presidential race.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country.
John Eastman, who?
Why is anyone talking to John Eastman?
Attorney John Eastman. Video from Fox News shows FBI agents seizing his cell phone.
I'm very sympathetic to him legally. I don't know him personally, and politically we're on completely different sides.
I do think you should be disbarred if you've lied about something or you've represented something that you know is not true.
He asked me to help design a strategy. One could not have predicted that that would subject me to years of lawfare, but I thought it was important to do to take on that representation.
Was it worth it?
Breaking news right now. Federal investigators obtained a warrant to search the phone of former lawyer for President Trump, John Eastman.
The very reason we have the Fourth Amendment is to prevent that kind of abuse, and yet that's what they're doing here.
Professor Eastman was targeted in ways the likes of which we've never seen before.
This is an example of lawfare, using the law against one's political enemies.
Distorting laws that have been on the books for a long time to find people we don't like because they're saying things that we don't like, and then to use those criminal laws to go after them. That's lawfare on steroids.
I'm just terrified. That's what the communist country do in China, like China. They go after the lawyers.
Oh, he should be disbarred. If he advised Trump, he may need to go to jail.
I think John Eastman deserved to be disbarred.
That's just left-wing McCarthyism.
The head of CISA says at one point this is the most secure election in our nation's history. And I can't believe he could say that with a straight face. It's laughably false.
Jim, you won't believe it. I just heard that a van dropped off boxes of ballots in the middle of the night.
Wisconsin was lost by 20,000 votes. Georgia was 10,000 votes. Those are very small numbers.
Do you still think the election was stolen?
Absolutely. If we're going to function as a society that the founders bequeathed to us, I don't think we can function without freedom of speech. The ability to question the government when they go astray is critical to the notion that the government works for us rather than the other way around.
John, it's a terrific looking film. How do we get how do we get to see the entire film?
Well, it's still available for free streaming at eastmandilemma.com. And people should go and watch it. It's about an hour and 4 minutes. It's not a long, but it's a documentary. We wanted to accomplish three things with it. We wanted to talk about the evidence that we had of illegality in the conduct of the 2020 election. Because, you know, the narrative that's been pushed out by media the world over is that 65 different courts looked at this and they all rejected it. There was no evidence of illegality. And that's just blatantly false. The courts that dismissed their cases did so on technical grounds without ever looking at the evidence and addressing the merits. And the second thing we wanted to do is point out that the recommendation I made on how to try and deal with this when the courts were refusing to was historically grounded in an open question of constitutional law That's for which I'm now being disbarred and criminally prosecuted, but it was clearly an open avenue. And then the third thing is to talk about the lawfare that has happened since, and not just against me, but the purpose of this lawfare is to so discredit me that my arguments on other issues like birthright citizenship or the spending limits on the federal spending power, that they don't ever have to confront the argument. They just say, well, Eastman, who's been disbarred, and I haven't yet, but Eastman, who's been disbarred or criminally prosecuted, is the one advancing this argument, so you don't need to pay any attention to it. It's their way to avoid any serious counter to the arguments that are being made. But more fundamentally, and they say this point blank, they say it openly, our goal is not just to get the lawyers that were involved in that disbarred, but to make them so toxic in their firms and their communities that no other lawyers will want to take up these kind of cases again. And that's the bigger threat, it seems to me. You know what, if I lose my bar license, okay, I'm close to retirement, that so be it. But they're trying to prevent people from ever taking up challenges to whatever the government narrative is, whether it's the illegality in an election, or it's boys competing against your girls in soccer or swim meets or track meets, or 50-year-old men exposing themselves in the public showers to your daughters and wives. If you stand up against that, they want to scare the heck out of you so that you won't be able to get a lawyer to ever fight back. They want to create a society where the people act like sheep rather than in control of their government. And that's I think the most important message to come out of the film. The Eastman dilemma, I joke, I said, I never had any dilemma. Of course I was going to stand up and fight this. The dilemma, I think, is for my colleagues in the profession. Are they going to sit on their hands, on their butts, whatever you want to say, and allow this to happen and be cowered into silence? Or are they going to do something that lawyers are supposed to do? You know, we used to praise John Adams, our second president. He was a lawyer, and he represented the British soldiers in the Boston Massacre case and got roundly criticized for that. But he became a hero of the profession for standing up and making sure that everybody had a defense, that everybody was entitled to a lawyer and a legal defense. And what we've witnessed over the last 5 years is that's no longer true in this country. And God help us if it stays untrue for a while. You know, there's that wonderful play that Shakespeare wrote, Henry II. The famous line, most people don't understand it. He says, the first thing we do, we kill all the lawyers. And people think that line means we don't like lawyers, so we should kill them. And I've met some lawyers lately in the prosecutor's office that I think I, kind of share that sentiment with, but that's not what the line is. There's a group of people getting ready to overthrow the government, overthrow the king. And Dick the Butcher, one of the conspirators, says, well, if we're going to do that, the first thing we do, we need to kill all the lawyers because they stand in the way of oppression. They stand in the way of tyranny. And if we're going to become oppressors and tyrants, the first thing we need to do is kill all the lawyers.
Yeah. Wow. Jeez. When you talk about this approach to silence you and this credentialism, in other words, to discredit you, to remove your long list of credentials. For goodness sake, you work for a Supreme Court justice. You are a doctor of jurisprudence, the understanding of the philosophy of law. I mean, of all people to try and take out like that, they've got some chutzpah to go for you in the way that they are, because it really is going to the very top of the tree. My question is, in this psychology of hive-mindedness, I call it, this idea that no one can step out of line, who do you think controls the agenda that makes everyone fall into line? Is it a deep state? Is there someone or something at the top of this pyramid? How does it work, and what's your understanding?
Well, I think you mentioned at the outset the Davos event. I mean, there's a group of business and political and financial leaders that really think they know better how the globe should be governed than ordinary citizens in their own nation states. They want to abolish the nation state system, and they want to impose a single world government, a world order. And how they do that, I think the folks in the bureaus, the word bureaucrat comes from the word bureau, the unnamed, faceless bureaucrats that work, toil away or don't toil away, as the case may be, inside these unelected agencies. They're pawns largely, but in charge of those different operations are people with much more connection to this global effort, and they have a certain agenda to implement, and they do it from within these infrastructures that have been created over the last century that are directly contrary to the notion of consent of the governed and the self-governing people. And I think, I can't put names, the name that comes to mind is George Soros. I think in many ways he's a punching bag, but he does have his tentacles in a lot of things. You follow the money. You follow the money in election illegality. But there are a lot of others. Mark Zuckerberg spent nearly $500 million in the 2020 election, laundered through nonprofits to affect an outcome of an election that was illegal. Last I checked, $500 million was a little bit higher than the $3,200 maximum contribution you could make to a candidate, and they were clearly coordinating with the candidate. So it was illegal, and nothing's happened. Nothing's happened about it. I think Kash Patel and Dan Bongino over at FBI and Pam Bondi and Harmeet Dillon and others over at the Department of Justice, Ed Martin in particular, who's now heading the weaponization task force, are looking into this, because in my view, what occurred in 2020 was a nationwide conspiracy to deprive the American people of their right to a free and fair election. That's a serious federal felony, and I hope that we see some indictments coming down pretty soon as a result of their investigations that have been ongoing ever since the day they walked into the office.
Okay, because this is the point right now. Let's get into the meat and potatoes here. In the last 24 to 48 hours, Sunday night US time, we arrive at a memo that pops out of the Department of Justice and the FBI that kind of looks a little bit odd. It doesn't have an author, it doesn't look official, but Axios runs with it and the whole world has gone with it. And it says that in terms of Jeffrey Epstein, despite the fact of 300 gigabytes of material, thousands upon thousands of images of child abuse material that is illegal, there is nobody in those videos apart from Jeffrey Epstein that can be punished. And people are wondering, how is this possible? Has the Department of Justice, has the FBI been got at? Have they been hoodwinked? Have we been oversold, overpromised and underdelivered? So many questions. Or is in fact this just another game of strategy that's going to lead to something? Parking that there for a moment, it could well be that the same cast of characters, the usual suspects, are also involved with other particular plays, such as the 2020 election, because this is absolute power doing, just to quote Kash Patel, doing whatever it can take in order to stay in power. And Donald Trump appears to be the enemy of this entire existence of said establishment. They are globalists. He's a nationalist. They are for climate change. He's against carbon dioxide being a poison or a toxin or something like that. So he's anti-climate change. He's anti-globalist. He's pro-America. He's pro-capitalism. He's anti-open borders. Like, you can't be more obvious that he's their opposition. And of course, they went after him. They tried to kill him. They tried to lock him up, etc. So putting that all on the table there, how did you interpret what happened with Epstein? And is it a case that you think that they may be compromised, or is it a case that they may have just been outplayed, for example, by being set up to look stupid at this point because they can't deliver on what they promised?
I think we're at the very beginning of this story. And I think, there are a couple of recent examples of why we should be careful not to draw conclusions very quickly. And the most recent example, of course, is the leaked low value intelligence report on whether we took out Iran's nuclear facilities and capability. That was leaked by somebody that wanted to discredit President Trump. It was leaked from, and it was not true. And, within 48 or 96 hours, we learned, in fact, that it was not true. Another example from the first administration, you remember what they called the Trump Muslim ban, his ban on immigration from certain terrorist sponsoring countries. It wasn't a Muslim ban; it was a terrorist country ban. But the carryover Obama person in the Department of Justice put out a memo saying that this would prevent the return of green card holders from those countries as well. And then that was guaranteed to get blocked as a result. Well, it turns out that memo was not true. It was deliberately designed to create a false case to stop the president's agenda. So I don't yet know whether, in fact, this memo, as you point out, unnamed, where it comes from, it just shows up, is in fact a leaked memo trying to discredit what may have been about to come down, or alternatively, look, it's possible there are some prominent Republicans and supporters of Trump that were implicated in this, and they didn't, and folks in the Department of Justice thought that they should not pursue it. I think that would be a grievous mistake if that's the case. But I've got a pretty good amount of faith in Kash Patel and Dan Bongino that they wouldn't be party to such a thing. And so I think there's got to be something else going on here that we don't know the fullness of it yet.
And this is the point, isn't it? Because look, if Dan Bongino was so compromised as an example right now, given that he walked away from a quite a successful career behind the microphone, quite lucrative, and certainly doing much better than he'd be doing financially there, you would kind of think that you might hand in your resignation and say, not for me, or family or health or whatever you want to do, and just walk away at that point. But he's not doing that, of course. And the same would go for Kash Patel. And of course, there are many people questioning Kash Patel, and there's always rumors and innuendo and misinformation about who he's dating and the connections there, etc., which is eternally frustrating. And I think this is the hardest part with following along in this position, realizing that there is genuinely an information war taking place. But what I often talk about is the politics of idealism. The idea that because we've broken away from the corrupt system intellectually, we feel like that you must therefore be pure at everything. And so such a thing must be therefore corrupted within itself. But the one thing that I've learned from President Trump, apart from developing a thick skin and determined to become self-sufficient, is the fact that you still must play politics, and politics is still decided 51-49 every single time. And we just saw with the big, beautiful bill, the same thing. It was J.D. Vance that cast the deciding vote, for goodness sake. After all of that work, all of that landslide victory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it comes down to the VP, the vice president, being able to do so. So it is always razor thin. Given that, therefore, should we be perhaps a little bit more accepting or trusting like you are in this situation, given yourself, you are being told, we are being told, it's being set up in the narrative, do not trust John Eastman going forward. This is the entire plot. You're uncovering it. What I'm trying to say is, where's the human connection in terms of the system here, and how do we navigate that as human beings to know that we need to pick a team and stick to it, almost like it's a game of football?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that these are little skirmishes on a much larger battlefield. And the battlefield is between these nationalist populist uprisings against command and control central governments, Soviet-style governments, and globalization. And look at, in that light, the people that have been in power for decades, from even Republican presidents, even Trump's first administration, the deep state continued to act as if they were the ones running the show. Trump was only there for a short time, and if they just obstructed him and ignored his commands, that they could get through that. That hasn't gone away. Trump's election didn't all of a sudden eliminate the deep state, and they really view this Trump-led MAGA movement, not just in the United States, but worldwide, as a serious threat to their ongoing exercise of power. And they will do anything to try and derail that, to try and create wedges within the movement so that it becomes a circular firing squad, and the movement then ceases to be as successful as it's been. And that may well be what the purpose of this latest game is, right? put this out. It's going to create a lot of people in the MAGA movement upset that Pam Bondi is not bringing criminal indictments against people, and other people saying, trust them. Let's see where this plays out, trying to drive a wedge in the movement. And if you divide the movement, you can conquer it. And that seems to be, on a larger scale, what we should be concerned about. And I think if people would look at it in those terms, they would be a little more hesitant to jump on, the bandwagon of every false flag narrative that comes along. If they stick with it, who benefits from this false flag narrative? If it's false, if you ask that question first before you quick retweet something, you'll I think get a better understanding of what's going on. And it is a war. They're trying to make it a war within the MAGA movement itself, or the Polish populist movement, or the Australian populist movement. Look, I mean, New York Times accused me of interfering in the Polish election because I went and spoke at CPAC Poland the week before the presidential election year, and the conservative populist candidate won, gained about 8 or 10 points in the final days, in large part because, not my speech, but Kristi Noem was there as well, and whatever. But this is an international. It's not a globalist movement. It's a coordinated nationalist movement in each nation of people who are saying, 250 years ago, the Americans gave us an example, a principle that the rest of the world has looked to for the intervening centuries. That as Jefferson once said, we've learned that mankind is not born with saddles on their back, destined to be ridden by somebody booted and spurred for them, that we are all equal. And that means we govern ourselves, and we have the capability of governing ourselves. And that is directly contrary to this globalist movement that they want to exercise power over us. They want to treat us as subjects rather than citizens. And so I think if people would step back and say, all right, who benefited from that false flag operation? And shouldn't we then stay joined in forces to expose the false flag operation that's trying to prevent us from restoring our birthright, which is self-government?
Indeed. On that note, we will take a quick break and we will return here. You're watching the 51st State.
Welcome to Marina Bay, Lombok, the next iconic destination in Southeast Asia. A visionary beachfront city designed for the future, where untouched nature meets world-class development. Just a short flight from Bali, Lombok offers a fresh canvas for modern living and smart investment. With new infrastructure and Indonesia's first MotoGP circuit nearby, the time to act is now. Marina Bay is not just a resort. It's a fully master-planned beachfront city spanning across 25 hectares. Designed to international standards and inspired by global icons like Sentosa in Singapore and the Marina Bay Sands lifestyle. At the heart of Marina Bay lies our world-class marina built for lifestyle, leisure, and convenience. Dock your yacht, catch a sunset cruise, or arrive by sea to your own private jetty. Unlike Bali, Lombok remains clean, open, and poised for explosive growth. Government-backed tourism zones, high-rise zoning, and Western-style planning make Marina Bay a rare opportunity for first movers. From luxury condos to resort villas, retail spaces to investment lots, Marina Bay caters to holidaymakers, families, retirees, and investors alike. Whether you're seeking lifestyle, income, or capital growth, Marina Bay delivers. Designed for a balanced life, Marina Bay will host an international school, co-working hubs, cafes, restaurants, spas, and world-class wellness centers, all just steps from the beach. Earn passive income with fully managed villas and rental-ready apartments. Our investment options are backed by realistic forecasts and proven regional demand. Join our early investor program. Secure the best pricing, exclusive plots, and be part of something extraordinary from day one. This is not just a destination, it's a movement, a new city, a new way of life. Marina Bay, Lombok. Live, invest, thrive.
And welcome back to the 51st State. Now, John, before the break, it's just bringing up a whole bunch of new questions. And I'm wondering, how do you interpret Elon Musk's behavior and therefore the introduction of this American party? Is this one of those examples of the divide? Or could there be yet another play here that maybe those that are so anti-Trump but are so disappointed in the Democrats that the America Party might actually recruit from the Democrats even more than from the MAGA movement?
Yeah, I don't know what Elon Musk is up to. I've seen lots of speculations that this fight between him and Trump is actually coordinated between the two of them. Well, if Musk is now against it, we must be for it. Or if Trump is against it, then we must be. So there's lots of psychological warfare going on. One never knows what is being played out or not. Look, when Elon Musk, founder of Tesla, and you get all these lefty liberal crazies buying Teslas because they're going to save the world from climate change, and then Elon Musk supports Trump, and they all start getting rid of their Teslas. I want to go down every cause they have and have Elon join us in it, and then they'll repudiate it. The other thing that may be going on, though, it seems to me, is possible, and that is Musk's legitimate concerns about the big, beautiful bill not getting a handle on the hemorrhaging of spending in Washington, D.C. And there are two problems with that. One, as you pointed out, it's still the art of the possible, this politics thing. You need to get 51 votes, 51%, right? But the second thing is, I think, and I hope he's got some people advising him now. I don't think Elon Musk understood the limits on the process for the reconciliation process. There are certain things you can accomplish through reconciliation that you can't accomplish otherwise. And it's very constrained. And the reason it's important to stick within those guide rails is if you're in reconciliation, you can do it by simple majority vote. J.D. Vance cast the majority plus one vote and we win. And you avoid the filibuster in the Senate. A lot of the things that he would like to accomplish and criticize the big, beautiful bill for not accomplishing could not be done through that process. So they make as much advance as they can with that process, and then they fight another day in different arenas for the other. So here's a good example. Trump is implementing a lot of the Doge cuts that Elon and his team identified. Couldn't be done through reconciliation. Has to be done with what's called a rescission proposal. Under the Impoundment Control Act that was adopted in the waning days of Richard Nixon's weakness administration, that the federal government must spend money Congress appropriates. They can't just not spend it, but they can propose to Congress that we rescind certain amounts of money. And if Congress approves the rescission, then it doesn't get spent. If they don't approve it within 45 days, then it must be spent. Which is kind of crazy. It's like asking permission for your chicken coop from the fox, but that's beside the point. They will now in July and in August be very aggressive with the rescissions, which is where a lot of what Elon was concerned about will now happen. I've seen it published that they are even considering what's called a pocket rescission. The fiscal year ends on September 30th. So the 45 days begins to run August 15th. If they propose a rescission after that, Congress, the money will have failed to be spent before the fiscal year ends and then legally can't be spent. It's called a pocket rescission. And I think they're aggressively looking at that as well. So let's wait a few more months and see whether what Elon Musk has expressed concern about, and he's right to express concern about. We are spending money like we're going over a cliff. I used to say we're spending money like we're a bunch of drunken sailors, but that's grossly unfair to drunken sailors. They had to quit spending money when they ran out of it. We keep going, and he's rightly concerned. I mean, we're looking at Venezuelan level bankruptcy stuff and inflation if we don't get a handle on this. So he's rightly concerned about it, but it's a concern that is shared, but at the upper levels of the administration. And I think when they play their cards still yet to be played on this issue, I think Elon will recognize that the big beautiful bill accomplished a lot, but it did not accomplish everything because it couldn't. And these other steps, these other maneuvers, will aim at accomplishing a lot of what remains that Elon Musk said needed to happen. I think that's where we'll be, and I think they'll kiss and make up by the fall, and we'll be back going forward to win the midterm elections in 2026.
It's funny to watch because those that have accused Trump for the last almost decade of being far right now can't use that accusation because he comes back to the center. If you're arguing that Elon Musk wants to drastically cut government spending, that makes him take that position on the so-called far right, therefore. And yet it's meant to has already attracted Mark Cuban, who endorsed Kamala Harris. So it's such an interesting dilemma, isn't it? It's almost like give us someone else to support here. So you can be on the left, you can be on the right. It's almost like the spectrum doesn't apply anymore. It's simply economic management, nationalism versus globalism, and the reality of truth versus narrative. And the idea, like that, what Tucker Carlson says, there's no such thing as misinformation. There's simply truth or lies. Misinformation, therefore, being when you disagree with the government narrative and prove them wrong using facts. And that's when you get accused of this. And there we are at Wrong Speak and the Ministry of Truth. And we're way back right here in 1984. And so it's enormously frustrating for all of us because everything that was up is down, everything that's down is up, everything is upside down. It's so hard to make sense of what is going on.
I think the prophet Isaiah had a saying about this. At one point, they will declare good as evil and evil is good.
Literally where we are today, like you mentioned before about, whether allowing, men in women's sports, etc., and how that can even be considered fair, but because it's woke, you have to just go along to get along. That for me has been the hardest thing all along is the weakness of character for so many people for whatever reason, and generally it comes down to money, whose palms agrees the most, whether or not you can walk away from your job during COVID to resist the tyrannical approach to a virus, etc., that we still haven't even dealt with, that may well be man-made. In fact, it's almost certain at this point. You've got the CIA and the FBI agreeing now it came from a lab. So
took them a while, and they roundly criticized people that said that at the beginning. Called them spreading misinformation, disinformation. In fact, it was true. It really is. Well, we've morphed science into Soviet science. The government says, despite all evidence that you're starving, the government says we've had our bumper crop this year, and I don't know why you think otherwise. Because you can't put food on your table doesn't mean we didn't have a bumper crop, because we said we had a bumper crop. And this is what tyrannical government is like. And the American people got a taste of it during that COVID crisis, and they didn't like it much. And they're now saying, well, wait a minute. Last I checked, we still have the ultimate authority in this country if we would but exercise it. And as they coordinate with each other to try and exercise that power, you see the government getting more and more aggressive with spying on fellow citizens. Look, the biggest scandal in American political history, I think, was the Russia hoax. They set up this false thing. Hillary Clinton launders millions of dollars through her law firm for what they report was legal compliance on their financials, and to hire a former British spy with a Russian source to create this phony story about Trump that our own government officials, knowing that that was phony, used to spy on the opposing political campaign, continue to spy on him after he's elected and even after he's inaugurated. This is a huge political scandal. And one guy has had any consequence at all. It was a little slap on the wrist. He got a 1-year suspension of his bar license, but it was made retroactive. So by the time it came down, he'd already finished the sentence, the suspension. And nobody else has paid any price whatsoever for that monumental scandal. And I think one of the frustrations you see over the Epstein story, over the lack of criminal indictments of anybody, is people expected the incoming administration to aggressively go after these blatant illegalities and hold people accountable. And it hasn't happened yet. And we're in 6 months now. And I think people are getting a little frustrated. But I suspect that the folks that are there, they're dealing with two things. One, putting these cases together, particularly long time after the fact, it takes a lot of effort, and a lot of the people that are in the line positions in those agencies are hostile to the effort. So they're dealing with deep state folks trying to obstruct. They're trying to cross every T and dot every I, because they're only going to have one chance at this. And if they make a mistake out of the box, it'll close up shop and be done. And so they're having to be very careful. And I hope that we start seeing the results of that in fairly short order. Going into the 2026 election and this stuff coming out daily, I think would be a very good thing. So we'll see what happens.
That is really interesting, because if we sort of put it all together, we've got manufactured COVID, which on its own effectively becomes the greatest crime against humanity ever perpetrated, if proven to be the case that it was manufactured to order, let out, and then the solution being worse than the cause. And then you get into the whole Operation Warp Speed and the tactical reasons why Trump went that way. And he's a master at being able to put the pressure back on himself in order to move a narrative into a new direction. My argument there is that if he had not created Operation Warp Speed, we may still be sitting in lockdown years later, waiting for the 10-year cycle of this vaccine and then being forced to take it. So that was one of those reasons. We look at the compromat system. You would think that would be what Epstein's MO was all about. Today, we've seen Trump come out and literally give one of the journalists a bit of a serve in the White House for even bringing up the name of Epstein. Aren't we over this? Which was an interesting position. Well, clearly, President Trump, we're not. So we need more explanation. You just mentioned Russiagate just being just a next level crime against a sitting president and candidate, and all of these things, and of course, auto pens and the pardons, etc., and the whole Hunter Biden scandal, and of course, it seems like nothing ever comes of it. So putting all that together, I guess for the final question for our chat today, John, is the creation of artificial intelligence, and almost the first thing that Trump did when he got to office was introduce this $500 billion investment into artificial intelligence. So to set this up, this question, he who controls AI, and we've already seen that it's programmable in its first instance. You ask Grok, for example, how are you learning? I've taught certain things, and then it teaches itself, or it learns certain things. So he who controls the AI seemingly controls the world at that point. Is there a place in the legal profession that artificial intelligence will be able to hold public authority to account in ways that public authority is trying to use it to hold private citizens to account using the Big Brother technique? How would you view that?
It's a very interesting question, and I don't think we've seen the end of this story even begun yet, much less concluded. I'll give you one example. I used artificial intelligence to ask a question on one of the birthright citizenship briefs that I was responding to, and they cited an 1802 case that I was not aware of, and it seemed odd to me. And so I asked Grok what was the story behind the case, and it didn't give me the direct answer, but it pointed me to the original source that I was able to go look up and see that the case was, in fact, they were citing it for something it didn't stand for. But then I thought, well, let me ask Grok about the broader question of birthright citizenship. And its immediate response was to give the standard false narrative answer. And then I asked it, well, what about this? And it said, that's a very good question. I think I made a mistake. Let me adjust my earlier opinion. And I have this whole dialogue with Grok. and he eventually comes around to asserting that the position I had taken for many years now was in fact the correct one, but it took a while to get there. So you've got to understand artificial intelligence as a tool that can point you to original sources. You can't accept it as gospel truth because it makes mistakes and it makes things up. And it made some claim, and I said, that's just not right. Here's the proof that it's wrong. He said, I made a mistake, or I made it up. And so I think we need to use it for the tool it is to identify sources, but we ought not to give up our human intellect and our human knowledge to question it. And I think that can be useful because the American people, there is so much information out there. And trying to sort the good from the bad, the false from the true. They can use Grok to try and identify things that don't sit right, and then do some further research to hold people accountable when they've put out statements that are just manifestly false, like Mr. Krebs saying that this was the most free and fair election in history in 2020. I mean, it was laughable. And you can use it for that tool to hold political leaders accountable, just like anything else on the internet. But you've got to be very careful in how you use it. Not everything on the internet is made equal. I mean, we've learned Wikipedia has been taken over by woke crowd, and you try and use it for anything beyond just straight non-contested facts, and it's political. And you've got to understand that and know the limitations of the tool. And I think the most important thing going forward is going to be to teach our children how to be more discerning in what they read. That's going to be tough because they've grown up now thinking anything that's on the internet must be gospel truth. I often joke with my friends. I said, they know that any New York Times story written about something they know directly, the story is false. But for everything else, it must be absolutely true. And it's quite a disconnect. And we've got to learn to be more discerning human beings on the information and question it. And to the extent AI can help us with that, if we understand its limitations, I think that will be a very good thing for arming us to push back against manifestly false government narratives.
Well, that's a very, very powerful answer. I should ask you, therefore, in terms of birthright citizenship, therefore, if someone is an illegal immigrant into the United States and a child is born whilst they are on American soil, this is obviously what you're talking about. Does that human being maintain citizenship from retroactively, or is this part of this new move that they therefore have to fall back to where their parents came from? How is that defined legally, and what's your approach to that?
Well, the 14th Amendment is a bit unclear to our modern ears or eyes, but it's not, as Hawaii Senator Hirono said after Trump's executive order. She posts on Twitter. She says, "Our Constitution is clear. All persons born in the United States ... are citizens." That's what she writes. Well, the key phrase, the phrase where the dispute is all persons born in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction are citizens. And so the question is what that meant. Did it mean what they called partial or territorial jurisdiction? Everybody visiting the United States has to comply with our traffic laws. If I go visit you in Australia, I've got to comply with your local laws while I'm there. I'm subject to that territorial jurisdiction. But I don't owe Australian government allegiance when I visit. I'm not subject to the complete jurisdiction. And when the drafters of that language were asked, which of those things did you mean? They said it means complete jurisdiction, not owing allegiance to anybody else. And so Native Americans who owed allegiance to their tribes when they were born were not automatic citizens. Temporary visitors, sojourners was the word they used, were not automatic citizens. And if they're not automatic citizens, then people who have come to the country illegally are clearly not automatic citizens when they give birth either. And that's all Trump's executive order does, is it returns us to the original meaning of that 14th Amendment. Now, if Congress wants to say, we really like Australians, and however they get born here, we're going to make citizens out of them, Congress has the full power to do that under the naturalization power. The question is, does the Constitution already mandate it? And the answer, it seems to me, historically, is pretty clearly no. This was an old feudal doctrine that we threw off with the Declaration of Independence. When you were born on the king's soil, you guys know this, you were part of the king's empire for many, many years. When you were born on the king's soil, you were the king's subject. He was your liege lord. That's where we get the word allegiance from. And you could never renounce it. You look at the last paragraph of our Declaration of Independence. It says we, the United Colonies, are and of right ought to be free and independent states. And we hereby absolve all allegiance to the king. It was a repudiation of birthright citizenship, birthright subjectship. So we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to form a political community based on the consent of the governed, of equal, co-equal human beings. And that's what we do. And so we repudiated it philosophically, historically, textually, and somehow it seeped back into our psyche that if you're born here by hook or crook, you're a citizen. Chinese, enemies of the United States come here to birth tourism and create citizens who will then infiltrate our country years later. It's nonsensical. But hopefully the Supreme Court will get it right. Trump's executive order, in my view, clearly does.
It is the most incredible time to be alive when you look at what's happening right now, that a man that you either love him or hate him, but he has to be considered the most effective politician that we've seen in a century, if not history. And he's only in the middle of the fight here, literally, 3.5 years to go. And what will come out at the other end means that whoever is the enemy of Trump needs to be dealt with completely, or they're going to just come back like mushrooms and pop back up again. And it feels like that he knows that better than all of us combined, that cannot be the case. So given the conversation we've had today, John, we have got a lot to look forward to, a lot to observe, and in your case, a lot to hope that you stand firm and defeat these cowards that are trying to silence you as you do the work to free all humanity from the tyranny that's been put upon us. And I can't thank you enough for taking your time to be on the show today, and of course the work that you do for the great United States of America. They need many more John Eastmans.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I froze up there for a minute. I didn't catch that last thing, but I do think Trump is. I will say this: Ronald Reagan brought an end to the Cold War without firing a shot, and a lot of the domestic things we would have liked him to accomplish had to play second fiddle to that because that was an existential threat. Trump is picking up where he left off and tackling the deep state at home, the tyranny at home, and it's really not only quite a thing of beauty to watch, but in some small measure to be part of. And so people ask me, would you do it all over again? I said, yeah, and in fact, I'd probably do it more aggressively if I could than I did before, because the stakes are very high and the fight is very high. And these enemies, the globalists and the deep state in this country, but the globalists internationally, they're not going to give up power easily. And they think they can just ride this out and get back to business as usual when it's done. And so it can't just be a temporary fix. It's got to be a decapitation of this serpent that we are confronting. And I think Trump understands that in this term in a way that perhaps he didn't fully in the first term. I think he was really surprised at how deep the problem, how deep the rot in the federal government ran. But he didn't come in hesitating at all to take it on. And you've got to just applaud what he's doing and wish him well and Godspeed in accomplishing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if you'd like to support John in his ongoing legal battles, there's a URL there on the bottom of the screen, givesendgo.com/Eastman. That's one way that you can participate. If you'd like to follow John's work, you can go to claremont.org there on the screen. And if you'd like to watch this incredible film, eastmandilemma.com, and it's still available for free on that website. John Eastman, thank you for your time today on the 51st State. It's been an eye-opener. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Jason, thanks for having me again. Take care.
Terrific. Well, on that note, we will conclude today's show, and I'll see you all on the 51st State in another week's time. I hope you enjoy. Like, comment, share, all of the above. This is the only show in Australia exploring areas that you cannot even contemplate on the soil. But there you go. What a great episode we've had today. See you all.